Guys, it's me, DevilNeverCry, back again for another DMC5 related video. So today's video is basically going to be focused on the Capcom Confidential podcast. It's not in fact confidential at all, considering the fact that it's available to the general public, but confidential in the sense that you'd get information there that you wouldn't really get anywhere else. That's mainly because the podcast is comprised of Capcom staff, so you're getting your info straight from the horse's mouth. And today's video is going to be a rather short one. There's not a lot of in-depth detail here, but we learn more about DMC5's production and its past and how things essentially came together. I'll leave a link to the actual podcast episode down below, as well as a link to an error post that condenses down all of the information. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. So first of all, we learn that the base team that worked on DMC5, starting with the pre-production, was a team that was only made up of 4 individuals. So the most obvious is Itsuno, who acts as the director for the game. We have Kinoshita, who was the art lead, Nagaki, who is the character lead, and Wilson, the person responsible for designing the entire art pipeline for DMC5. Now Itsuno obviously is already a given, considering he's the director. His name is attached to the DMC franchise, or has been since DMC2, and it's to be expected. Then you have Wilson, someone who apparently has never played a DMC game. We come to find out in the podcast, but a person who says that he's a big fan of Dragon's Dogma. So he was responsible for creating all the base models for the monsters and the bosses, and then these base models were then outsourced to be created into high poly 3D models. They then lined up all these models, sort of getting a scale of all the monsters and enemies we face. Matt mentions Goliath, which turns out to be the big horn dude in the reveal trailer, who's got the massive face for a stomach, so we have a name for him. He mentions how the bosses just got bigger and bigger, and that the scale is pretty intense, possibly suggesting that Goliath isn't the largest boss we're gonna see, and who knows, maybe we'll get another Savior level of boss fight or Mundus level of boss fight, no doubt. Massive enemies are obviously a staple of the series. We also have Alex on the podcast, someone who worked on the art design for DMC5, and we hear things from his point of view, which is fairly interesting. When being asked to create art assets for the game, he was told to design art with the word slick in mind, which again makes sense. The DMC series is known for its smooth, smoking sick style action, so obviously when asked to produce art, they're obviously going to ask for something that's cool, that's slick, not anything that's like crazy happy-go-lucky or weird or edgy or whatnot. Interestingly enough though, we come to find out that they took this realism angle very seriously, with anything that was produced that was not realistic enough was basically just axed and was like, nope, go back to the drawing board, make this shit more realistic. Which again, interesting, but it makes sense because they want to have a cohesive theme here. If everything's super like hyper realistic and then you get some weird janky nonsense that doesn't fit in, it's going to throw you off. But then again, Alex said that they were given a lot of freedom when it came to producing art and assets. So whilst they obviously wanted you to adhere to some strict rules to make sure that everything was cohesive, they gave you a lot of freedom in terms of what you wanted to produce, which is cool. Obviously, you're not stifling any sort of creativity, but you're still imposing rules that make sure everything sort of fits well, like a jigsaw. Then, during the midst of the podcast, we find that Yuichiro Hiraki, is back to work on the animations from DMC5. And for those of you who don't know, they worked on the animations in DMC1 and DMC4. So you have some OGs here who are still working on this series, which is pretty cool. You know, they're sort of seasoned vets, you might say, with the series. The team then goes on to talk about the Goliath boss fight, and they discuss Belial, or Belial, however you want to say, from DMC4. And they sort of talk about the parallels and similarities, because obviously they're both massive bosses, you know, fire elementals, but then they also discuss the destructibility and whatnot, drawing parallels there, which is cool. Obviously, I mean, we see a lot of destructible nonsense in the trailer anyway, with the Goliath boss destroying the cathedral or whatever scenery they're in when they're fighting Nero. They then decide to talk about the concept of the van, of the mobile DMC. They talk about how it was designed to be like a character, giving it lots and lots of attention to detail, making sure it looked smooth, stylish, but also giving it, you know, its own personal flair, as if it was an actual character. We learned that Alex himself had designed the neon DevilNeverCry sign, churning out 40 or so logos before the one we see in the trailer being settled on, which sort of surprised him and the team, because that's his actual handwriting there on the side of the bus and in the game. We come to find out that apparently the neon sign was initially pink before being changed to blue, with no reason essentially being given here. Then we come to find out that Alex not only worked on the sign but also worked on Nico. So Alex is responsible for designing Nico's tattoos, I'm assuming. So if you don't like him, you know who to blame. Then obviously we get some hyping up for the next trailer, with the whole team popping off saying how amazing it's going to be. But then again, it's not like they're going to be like, oh, I'm so not looking forward to this next trailer, yada yada yada. You gotta remember, even though this is a sort of an informal podcast, they're still Capcom employees, so they're not going to start throwing out bad PR. And I'm just going to leave that off there for now. There's a few other tidbits here and there that I didn't really mention, but that's just because I didn't want this video to be dragging and long, so I decided to just focus on the more interesting aspects of the podcast. As I mentioned below, I'll leave a link to a full list of condensed information, as well as the link to the actual podcast, so whether you want to read or listen, you know, whether you want to listen to the entire thing, or maybe you want to just read the key facts and bullet points, it's up to you. I covered everything of importance, or, you know, what I thought you guys might actually like to hear. But if you want some more fluff and whatnot, I'll leave a link down in the description below. The thirst for DMC5 is pretty real at this point, with Gamescom just looming over our heads. We haven't really got long left to go, but the wait is still long as ever. It's been 10 years at this point, but what's 2 more weeks? I'd also like to make a note that the Road to DMC5 series is still going to be ongoing. Those videos aren't really going anywhere, and in fact one was going to be uploaded today, but considering this podcast just dropped and it's more relevant and contemporary information, I decided let's just focus on this for today, and we'll leave the Road to DMC5 video for another time. So with that out of the way, I'd just like to thank you guys for watching. We're almost at 700 subscribers here, so yeah, onwards and upwards.